Hello, and thank you for having me at the Safety Connect 2021 conference. My name is Jenny Bailey, and I'm the Director of Safety at Xcel Energy. I've been working in safety for about 25 years after getting a degree in environmental health and safety from the University of Georgia and a master's in public health from the University of Utah. And I started my career as an OSHA compliance officer and then moved into manufacturing, where I stayed for about 17 years. And I've been in the electric utility industry for getting close to 8 years now. So I'm really excited today to be here with you and share the journey that safety is taking as we move from our history, which relates to Hammurabi and Heinrich, toward Hollnagel and the new intelligence around safety systems. And I'm going to share the story of Xcel Energy and the electric utility industry and how we are embracing the new view of safety in this new journey. Let's start back in Babylon, where the king of Babylon, Hammurabi, ruled from 1792 to 1750 BC. And he proclaimed the law of the land was an eye for an eye. And this is some of the earliest written legal code that humans have. But it wasn't really a just code. It was unjust because the punishments that were doled out were far too harsh for the crimes that were committed. However, the safety improvement strategy embraced by many companies includes this type of eye for an eye philosophy by adding pain on top of the pain an employee has already experienced with an injury. Much in the same way, Hammurabi embraced the idea of an eye for an eye and punishment. So let's ask a question. If punishment is your only safety strategy, do you have an effective safety strategy? And we're going to try to answer that question today. The next stop on our journey includes Frederick Taylor. In 1911, he introduced the concepts in his book, The Principles of Scientific Management, that managers plan work and workmen complete work. His ideas included the concept, some outrageous claims about the intellectual capability of workers or the lack of intellectual capability of the workers. And I submit that some of his ideas that shed workers in a very negative light, being lazy and lacking sufficient mental capacity, led to the next stop on our journey, which was the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Triangle Shirtwaist Fire occurred in 1911 on March 25th at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York. On a Saturday afternoon, there were about 600 workers at the factory when a fire began in a rag bin. The manager on duty attempted to put the fire out with a fire hose, but it was rotted and the valve was rusted shut. As the fire grew and panic ensued, people began to lose their lives. So many of the young workers tried to exit via the stairwell, and the doors at the bottom of the stairwell were locked. And the management locked those doors in an effort to keep the workers from stealing shards of fabric or from going outside and slowing down production. So 146 employees, mostly women, actually mostly little girls under the age of 17, died in that fire that day because managers did not trust them to do the right thing and work hard. So the next stop on our journey is Heinrich in 1930. So Herbert William Heinrich was an individual safety pioneer who claimed that 88% of all accidents occurred because of unsafe acts. And we all know what he believed. He believed if you can stop the risk area, you can stop the near miss, you can stop the minor injury, then you'll also prevent the recordable injury, and most importantly, the fatal injury or the serious injury. Looking forward almost 100 years later, it's really odd to believe that we held on to this triangle for so long. And really what happens is there's different risks that cause fatal injuries than cause minor injuries or near misses. And we need to identify what those different risks are, and we need to put our energy around preventing life-altering and life-ending fatal injuries. But we can't do it by reducing sprained ankles. So let's see what embracing Heinrich's model has gotten us, at least in the electric utility industry. This graph here shows just the difference in what's going on over a 3-year rolling average in the electric power and generation industry between fatal injuries and recordable injuries. And that blue line that has that nice downward slope showing a real big improvement in our rate is recordable injuries. Unfortunately, the dotted line below it, the gray line, is fatal workplace injuries. And you can see that we've really not made any progress in changing the rate of people being killed at work in the electric utility industry. Although we've done a really good job of stopping sprained ankles, sprains and strains, lacerations, and other minor injuries. Is that really where we want our safety systems to be? This is another look at that same data. And I think this graph is really important to pay close attention to. These are the top second, third, and fourth quartile companies from the EEI annual survey in 2019. And I chose the year 2019 for a reason that I'll get to in a minute. But look at those top performing companies. So their performance is based and they're ranked based on the minor injury rate, the OSHA incident rate. And in an OSHA incident, a fatal injury looks exactly like a minor bee sting that required some medical attention. So just looking at OSHA rates can be deceiving. So those top performers have really low incident rates. If you look over there, they're less than, some of them are less than half, less than 0.5. So they're way less than 1. And the goal is to get to 0, which seems like it makes perfect sense. But research shows us that companies with 0 as a goal for injuries have more fatalities. And this chart seems to back that research up. So the numbers in the gray lines show us the number of employees who were killed in a 10-year time period for that company. So you can see the numbers for fatal incidents are much higher in the first quartile than they are in the other quartiles. So what's going on there? How does that make any sense that driving towards 0 fatalities actually makes fatal injuries go up? And the reason I chose this 2019 data is I want to point out that yellow bar. That yellow bar with the 4 fatalities that year is Xcel Energy. So in 2019, Xcel Energy had their best year ever for OSHA recordable incident rates and also restricted and lost time rates. So it seemed like everything was going great if you just looked at those numbers. But 4 people went to work at Xcel Energy sites that year and did not go home that night. 2 employees and 2 contractors. So the company leadership began to embrace the idea that maybe the traditional way of handling safety or managing safety was not really the way that we wanted to do business. We wanted to make sure we were preventing life-altering and life-ending injuries. So we started on our journey of safety always. So we're building a new safety culture at Xcel Energy. And based on some feedback from a culture survey and some information from EEI, we decided that we wanted to shift our focus. We wanted to move our investigations from assigning blame to people and stopping when you found an employee that made a mistake and feeling like we had found the root cause. We wanted our investigation to really help us to learn. We want to learn from our mistakes and prevent them from happening again. And we hope to catch those mistakes before a serious injury occurs. We want to change our culture to one that openly shares incidents and risks so that we can learn to prevent the most serious incidents and keep everyone safe. We want to go from a culture where there was fear of sharing because we were chasing a goal of 0 injuries to a culture of openness and trust that allows employees to report an injury, no matter how small, and know that they'll get the care that they need. And we're changing our focus. We're moving away from counting numbers like OSHA recordable incident rates and days away or restricted duty days or lost time cases, and moving toward a culture that really focuses energy around preventing life-changing injuries and life-altering injuries. So what we want to do is move our culture from good to great. So in 2020, we began shifting our safety approach to better prevent life-altering injuries and fatalities and ensure employees get the care that they need. We did not abandon the good that we had done, but took advantage of best practices and learning from the past and then building upon it. We started our safety culture journey by establishing a foundational understanding of the human and organizational performance principles, and we focused on 3 key areas for change. We changed the way we do safety, from shifting our focus away from preventing minor injuries and toward preventing the most serious ones. We changed the way we talk about safety by creating a culture of transparency where people feel free to report events and receive the care they need. As such, we moved away from our flagship safety label of Journey to Zero and embraced a new label we call Safety Always. And we changed how we measure safety and safety improvement with new corporate scorecards, moving away from OSHA and DART statistics as a measure of our safety success and toward a new metric that will track how well we are doing at changing our culture to be more open and transparent. So I mentioned that the foundation of Safety Always is built on human and organizational performance principles. And these are the 5 principles there. Error is normal. Blame fixes nothing. Learning and improving is vital. Context of a situation drives people's behavior, and how leadership responds to failure really matters. Add all of those up together and you really build a culture of improved trust and transparency. And that culture change is going very smoothly at Excel. So let's take each of these one at a time. We wanted to improve our safety culture by learning from mistakes and eliminating the idea of risk secrecy. Our goal of zero had encouraged people, although not on purpose, but had encouraged people to hide any injury that they could hide to help us achieve that goal of reaching zero. And sometimes an injury couldn't be hidden. And we were very quick to find what rule violation, whether it was intentional or not, what rule violation happened and if an employee should be punished. So we're doing things with the best possible intention. We were driving all of our risks and all of our learning and all of our knowledge underground where we couldn't use it. Sounds a little bit like Hammurabi and the eye for an eye. So I mentioned we really are focused on preventing life-changing injuries. And we're doing that through a critical risk management process, where we're hyper-focused on serious risks that could lead to a fatal incident or a serious incident. And we're even more focused on controls that keep people from being injured from those risks. We've got to know the hazards. We've got to pay attention to the most serious hazards. But more importantly, we have to pay attention to those controls and understand that when something goes wrong, that we've got systems in place for us to fail safely so everyone goes home that night. And then we wanted to also be able to share honestly and be transparent. And I know I've mentioned that several times, but that's a real cornerstone of the Safety Always culture. We can't fix what we don't know about. And if we are not allowing employees to tell us what needs to be fixed through an honest and transparent format, which we'll talk about later, then we can't really fix what our problems are. And so this culture has really started to take off, and I'm really excited to tell you about some other things that are happening in the electric utility industry. So in 2018, the Edison Electric Institute convened a group of about 20 safety professionals to talk about what a SIF injury is. What is a serious injury or potentially fatal injury? And so we had come up with a list of incidents that we know are serious and we know we don't want to have happen. Things like fatalities, concussions, amputations, internal organ injuries, bone fractures. I won't read the whole list to you. You can see them there. Permanent eye injuries, third-degree burns. That's really what we wanted to start with defining as a serious injury. But is that really a list that's exhaustive? Can you come up with a list that's exhaustive? So EEI sponsored a team led by a faculty member at the University of Colorado to help us define really what we wanted to work toward. So what the team came up with is the safety classification and learning model, which is a new model that considers just how serious a hazard is. And in circumstances that are beyond initial incident observations, controls, and outcomes. So we wanted to start having something we could measure that was much more meaningful. We wanted to also have a consistent and reliable definition of what a PSIF is. A PSIF is an incident with potential for serious injury or fatality. And much of the industry has really moved toward talking about this, but it really didn't have a good, strong definition. And we really figured this out when we got the team together the first time. And our academic lead asked everyone in the room, there was about 20 to 25 people in the room, if they knew what a PSIF was, and everyone raised their hand. And they all knew they had a definition of PSIF. Some of them had very formal definitions of PSIFs they used in their company. but they were all different definitions, just slightly. But when he asked everybody how confident they were that their definition was correct, everyone also still kept their hand up. So we had different definitions, slightly different, in different companies throughout the electric utility industry, but everybody was certain that their definition was right. So we developed this model, and the model defines safety incidents and observations based upon the answers to the following yes or no questions. Was high energy present? Did a high energy incident occur, or was there a release of energy? Was a direct control present? And was a serious injury sustained? So let's start by talking about what is high energy. So at the core of this process is the determination of, is high energy present? And the method is built upon evidence that serious injuries are the result of some undesirable contact with high energy. So EEI established a listing of common high energy hazards found in our industry. Things like voltage, height, temperature, weight, things that cause fatal and disabling injuries. Although useful and simple, this icon list is not exhaustive, but it is a really good place to start. So instead of paying so much attention on trip hazards, which we still pay attention to, we want to make sure we're paying the appropriate amount of attention to things like electrical contacts or arc flashes or falls from elevation. It really makes sense when you stop and think about it, that if we want to prevent serious injuries and fatalities, we need to be putting our energy where they're most likely to occur. How do you determine if there was a high energy incident? Well, there's three elements that go into an incident based on the model. One, was there high energy present? Two, was that energy released? And three, was an employee in close contact or proximity? And we define that here as less than 6 feet, or someplace where they couldn't get out, where they have restricted means of egress. Add all of those together and you have a high energy incident. So at XL Energy, we're using this model and we're hyper-focused on all the incidents that get turned in to make sure that we understand which ones had either high energy, a high energy release, or high energy with a pretty serious potential where somebody could have been hurt. So this is how the learning classification model looks in practical use. So you start at the top and you ask that question. We've talked about a few minutes here now. Was high energy present? If the answer is no, you go to the right of the decision tree and you ask, was a serious injury sustained? If it was, which can happen in low energy incidents, then it's what's called an LSIF. In an LSIF, there was no high energy present, yet a serious injury or even a fatality could have resulted or did result. If the answer is no, there was not a serious injury sustained, then that incident, whether it's a near miss or it's an incident itself, is of low severity. If you go back up to the top of the model and you ask if high energy was present and you say yes, that's where the model gets a lot more interesting. So then you ask, was there a high energy incident? Was a high energy released? If the answer is no, that's typically a near miss. And then you ask if there was a direct control present. If there was a direct control present, then you count that incident as a success. We're hyper-focused on the controls. The control was present. That's successful work. If there was not a control present, then that's an exposure. In an exposure, there was high energy present. It was not released, and yet there were no controls. So for example, maybe you have an employee working at height. You see them up 10, 12, 15 feet in the air with no fall protection or tied off to something that will not support their weight if they do fall. That's an exposure because obviously you get them down, right? But no event really occurred. So if you look at that you follow that train or that branch of the tree, you'll see that what we're trying to measure there is if we were lucky and we had an exposure, we did not have a control, or were we good? Were we successful? So going back up to the top where we have a high energy incident and there was a release of energy, then we go back to that question if an injury was sustained. If it was sustained, then we call that HSIF. An HSIF, there was high energy present and a SIF resulted. If there was not a serious injury sustained and we got lucky, going back to that word lucky, you ask yourself, was a direct control present? If the answer is no, then you have a PSIF. And that's how the EEI committee came up with the definition of PSIF. There was high energy present, but no serious injury was sustained. Yet the control was either not in place or did not work. And those blocks where we have that color, HSIFs are high energy serious injury or fatality. PSIFs, high energy with a potential for serious injury or fatality. And those incidents where we had an exposure to high energy, it wasn't released, but there still was no control in place, those are the places we want to learn. Those are rich in learning. So now I want to kind of share with you how Xcel Energy has changed our journey to really choosing how we learn. So we've deployed the practice of learning teams based again on human and organizational performance principles. We adopted this process about 2 years ago, and it could not be going better. What is a learning team? Well, a learning team is really just getting the people together that do the work and asking them about the work and asking them about the controls that are easy to use, the controls that are hard to use, and where they need better controls. It is not a root cause analysis investigation. It is not used to determine fault or guilt or blame, and it is not used for punishment. In fact, we have a strict policy at Xcel Energy. Once a learning team is deployed, then no discipline, formal discipline, informal discipline, any type of discipline will be given to the people that participate in that team or were a part of the accident, even if they don't participate in the learning team. So we do that in order to be transparent and to learn what we need to learn to fix our systems and be good and not be lucky. So to let you know just how well this is going at Xcel Energy, these are our numbers of event learnings that we've done this year. So in 56 different instances, we've gotten teams together to talk about working safely and why sometimes it's hard to use controls and what controls are missing. To date, we've identified 221 controls, and we've got about 108 of them completed. Roughly half of them are completed. So that really could look like we're not trying to get the controls completed quickly, but typically what it means for us is we're trying to use controls that may be a little bit harder to implement fully, but may be more effective. So we put interim controls in place in the meantime, but then we really look at our systems to see what we need to fix about things like training programs or general cultural issues that may have come up that we weren't even aware of. We're taking a really hard glance at our systems and not just the work at the time of the incident or the direct control that was missing. So we're also part of a community of practice, and I would recommend that if you can get involved with a community of practice around any of these principles that we're talking about today, that you participate. The power grows as more companies participate. And in fact, EEI member companies, many of them are participating in a community of practice where we're collecting data based on the SCL model, and we're following that flow chart so that we can learn as an industry where people are at risk and not just as individual companies. More companies that participate means a lot more robust data set, and the more robust the data set, the better the information we can glean. So to wrap up what's happening at Xcel Energy and in many, many companies who are member companies of the Edison Electric Institute, we're building a new safety culture. We're moving our investigations from assigning blame to learning from mistakes. We're taking a culture from a fear of sharing to a culture of openness and trust. We've moved our focus away from counting numbers and toward preventing life-changing injuries. And we're taking our culture from good to great. Thank you. And thank you for having me at Safety Connect 2021. I really enjoyed this time together. Thanks.